Consciousness. Consciousness is a human construct. Consciousness is like color. It's a human construct. And it's a human way of understanding things, so it's profitable. It turns out that in the real world, color doesn't exist. In the real world, there's no blue, there's no red, there's no green. You only think there's blue, red, and green because your brain decided it was a useful way to organize the perception of different wavelengths of light. Different wavelengths of light do exist, and different materials refract the light from the sun and other sources into our photoreceptors in our eyes in varying degrees, depending on the wavelength of the light, and that's all great. But that's just a human construct, right? The same way your brain is deleting you seeing you're blinking. You don't notice every time you blink the same way that you don't notice you can always actually see your nose. It's the same way that you think that there's this consciousness thing and it's important. But in reality, it's just a phenomenon of belief that's profitable and useful. However, just like color, it doesn't really exist. Consciousness doesn't actually exist, you just think it does. The same way that color doesn't actually exist, and you just think it does. Can you still make great discoveries and useful things in life by thinking color exists? Certainly, sure you can. It's very useful. But when it stops becoming useful, feel free to stop using it. The consciousness economy. Sales and marketing people have power over your consciousness. If it's true that the most rare and valuable thing in the world is human consciousness, and salespeople affect human consciousness, then salespeople are pretty powerful. Furthermore, salespeople and comedians are constantly refining their craft, mastering better timing and better wording to maximize the amount of response that they get and their target audience. Advertising for people to do the wrong thing. If you're advertising for people to do the wrong thing, you're killing the Mother Earth that birthed you. You're killing the system you live in. You're making the world that you live in a worse place. To some degree, that bad karma will come back to you, but sadly, probably nowhere near as close to the profit you make on causing it. That's the tragedy of the commons. If somebody gets to externalize the cost of destroying the environment and make extra profit, that's a great idea for them. Self-consciousness. Self-consciousness just means that instead of operating at your meta level, you can now see above you that there's another meta level with people walking around on it and a glass floor. And you can then hop up there and then back down into the minds of other players. You could call that empathy. The issue is that the whole empathy thing is more important for team effectiveness than it is important for calling to some sense of fairness. Team beats fair. Fair is kind of the weak flour that makes the team cake. Flour can be okay, but given the choice, you take the cake. Thus, stop being ignorant in regards to other animals having emotions. They do. And even if they didn't, you would get the profit from the rest of the people in your society of them not thinking you are a psycho and might kill them by treating those non-next level seeing things as things to be treated nice. It's less important the concept of fairness and more important the team effect. Consciousness isn't really a thing. Consciousness. You think it exists, but it doesn't actually exist. It's useful to think it does, though. It's like fuchsia. Fuchsia is not a combination of pink and purple. It is the color your brain comes up with when it sees contradictory color signals, such as very high and very low wavelengths, without the appropriate middle stimulation. It's the only color not in the rainbow. Pink and purple create a lavender color, whereas fuchsia is what happens when you combine colors in an unusual way. To be yet more pedantic, it's the only fully saturated color that's not present in the rainbow. Colors are perceptual phenomena, the interpretation of a spectrum of light impinging on a patch of retina that almost invariably contains more than one frequency at a time. Colors include white, black, gray, pink, tan, beige, baby blue, none of which are in the rainbow. Awareness. Understanding the present. It's funny, why try to understand the ancient world when you don't understand the present? Would you rather beat up the guy beating you or some other person in the past while your ass is getting kicked in the now? Mindfulness. In your life, you don't remember everything. You really only remember moments. Your memory is like any other muscle. It gets better with use. The more you journal the truly beautiful things that have happened in your life, the quicker you will be able to recall them, and the more of a positive effect they will have on your existence. For instance, if you win a very competitive game of something, it feels really wonderful for a moment, perhaps hours, but the feeling wears off. Not because it has to, but because you call it less and less into your memory, and human beings have a saturation point for everything. I think the reason winners look and act like winners is because they've won so many times that they are very ready to fall right into their I have won mode, even if they haven't yet, because their focus is on what they are used to winning, and you see and feel it in their presence. The inverse is true about losers. Thus, you must keep a daily journal of your magic moments and set out to create new magic moments, because they are what life and your memory is made of. Open up your book sometime and take a good whiff of all the beautiful things that have happened in your life. Don't let them disappear just so you can let your memory get rusty. Create a reverse journal highlighting all the beautiful things you can remember about your life before this date, because if you don't, one day you will not be able to remember them, and they will truly be lost forever, unless you are lucky enough for someone else to have done this work for you. Complain less. Complaining is describing an event in a negative tone with no indication of next steps to fix or improve the situation. Practice gratitude. Now we live in megacities, and you have the option of living in a house someone else built, eating delicious food someone else prepared, and watching a mirror as someone else cuts your hair with expert precision. How is this possible? Specialization. People get good at a couple things instead of being bad or average at lots of things. The end result is that all the goods and services we enjoy today are better than they could ever be if you had to do it all yourself. We stand on the backs of giants, the masses and masses of our ancestors who fought, lived, and died so that we could have the life and lifestyles we have today. Honor the past and honor the memory of all those that died and fought so hard to allow you the privilege of living this fine life. Appreciate more. Emotions are faster than thought. Literally, emotions are closer to the stem of your brain than all the fancy thinking things, and so it takes longer to react and transmit commands than it does to simply feel, and it should. You are important. If you're not willing to cut off your arm to feed other people, then by golly, perhaps you're not willing to just give away other things you own to them either. Perhaps executing that obvious fact is why nearly all the good stuff on this planet is the result of men organized in business with ownership and property enforced. As long as everything good in the world is made in that way, then you should find a way to do more of what works faster than doing what doesn't work, and hasn't worked for the most part, throwing money into places where it isn't used properly. It's no accident that business beat out selfless endeavors for making the world a better place. There's no comparison at all. Remember the one laptop per child program? Ever see one? Ever touch one? Ever use one? And that was one of the better ideas. The free market is the most powerful way we've found to fulfill the desires of the masses. Not the needs, but the desires. Getting them to desire what they should desire is currently their own problem, and the intelligent marketers in the world are usually working against the consumer's best interests. These days, the marketers are winning big time over the wholesome individual's ideal behaviors. Call what the world of marketing out there what you like. Many can tell you that if you designed the system from the ground up yourself, you'd probably not have everyone spending large percentages of their conscious life putting on a false face, hair, smell, etc., to trick their fellow man. It's kind of like the Cold War. If everyone would chill out with the arms race of personal appearance, everyone could relax a bit, and our desires would re-normalize. to back when everyone had pubic hair, but were still quite horny. Pity the crab louse. For those of you that haven't gotten out and about in the world these days, there's so little pubic hair in Western culture that the crab louse is going extinct. Now, Wikipedia says that there's no data for it, but noticing the recent hairless trend, the crab louse would have to be going homeless at an alarming rate if they need hair to live in. Now, Wiki says they can't tell because governments don't track it, and some would argue they're likely not trying hard enough. Sale figures for common treatments, or surveying primary care physicians and students regarding the status of that ailment should be little different from the queries they execute for other ailments, STDs, and drug use. If you're curious, just ask. SciVive won't bother searching for a compelling reason that the destruction of this creature's habitat would have effects any dissimilar than the many other creatures who've had their habitats destroyed, except, of course, that these things are blood-sucking parasites. So good riddance. Solve today's problems today. Extinction-level events would be a cool way to invest, better than hedonism from the perspective of an individual, but it is a slippery slope to care about the people so very far in the future. Let's say, however, that you did care about raw numbers and masses of people coming after you. Shouldn't you be breeding with everything that moves and maximizing your child output? The Quiverful Christian sect does exactly that. Pumps out the maximum number of kids possible. If you really care about the largest biomass of humans in the future, you should probably outlaw contraception as well. Might make procreating required by law and abstinence punishable by death. Perhaps that should help expand the population too. How stupid. Every sperm isn't sacred, boys, and much of the effort you put into the future fiction fantasy world will kill progress that could be made now or in the next 20 to 40 years. Focus on the problems you actually have. Focus on getting to the gym and lifting the weights and eating right. Don't worry about how you'll fit through doorways when you're bigger and stronger than Arnold Schwarzenegger was. You won't be. You're solving a problem you're never going to have. Solve the problems in order. Solve the damn problems you must solve to earn your next problem even existing. Solve today's problems today. They say the coward dies 1,000 deaths because one feels fear and imagines terrible fates often, thus destroying what could be a good life if one had some courage. The courageous person dies only once. Stop being a pussy in regards to today's problems by time-shifting your focus to the fantasy problems of the future. You'll find that a lot of those problems may solve themselves in ways that you couldn't have predicted. Imagine if you were spending big money on punch cards and vacuum tubes. You'd have wasted time perhaps optimizing for technology that paradigm shifts made useless. Find the best method to get people to care more about themselves and their families and the here and now, and not people thousands of years from now. It's like people choosing the imaginary people of Narnia or some other fiction novel over the real living people of this world. Don't worry about the fictional characters. We'll deal with them when they're closer to existing. The myth of equality. Equality is a widely believed myth. Equality doesn't exist. Not even 2-foot-long rulers are the same size. If they appear the same size or weight to you, it's only because you are bad at measuring things. Since two pieces of matter cannot occupy the same space at the same time, by definition, everything is not equal. Because everything is closer to some things and farther from other things. There are other situations where humans try to force equality where it would actually do harm. If you take the concept of pair bonding for social mating and rearing of children, when you remove specialization and attempt to make both members of the party good at the same things, you sacrifice the breadth of ability that comes from specializing in different areas. Men are supposed to do the heavy lifting, quite literally, which is why their muscles are bigger. Women are supposed to do the breastfeeding, which is why their breasts make milk. The hunt for equality, where there should be specialization, does harm, not good. The art is to avoid thinking that specialization is subjugation. Different doesn't imply hierarchy. In some places, hierarchy is surely implied, however. Who should do the fighting? men or women? Hand-to-hand combat? Who looks more able? Who wins in these matches in the real world? Reciprocity. Usually, equality exists in theory. If I push this direction, there's an equal and opposite force. Equality is useful for physics. Equality is useful for finding things that are similar. You must be a believer in equality to execute reciprocity. If the other teammates that you're interacting with realize that you don't believe in reciprocity and try to excel far beyond the equal, they will punish you. You will become hated for trying to gain the system. When you cut in line, everyone hates you because they knew you cut in line and your experience was unequal to, not as difficult, as theirs. SciVive will tell you that in the search for equality, trying to make all lifestyle paths the same is pretty stupid. All lifestyle paths are not the same. If you indulge in heroin, the lifestyle path that you have chosen is pretty stupid, and you are going to bring a lot of pain to yourself and to anyone else around you, and your life is likely to be very short because you chose the wrong path. If you chose ultra-violent dictator, you're going to die pretty early. If you chose to be the president of the United States, you're 100 times more likely to die than an average person. Those people get assassinated all the time. A lot of the decisions you make that you want to think are equal because of some desire to be fair to the world is a disservice to those around you and yourself. All choices are not the same. All paths are not the same. It is worth dedicating a great deal of time on better and worse exists than different exists, because the whole world is so trapped in finding equality where it doesn't belong that people are filled with delusion. Competition. If equality exists, why is there a Michelin star rating? Why do people use brands? Why do they choose Cheerios instead of tasteless oats? Why do they listen to different genres of music? Equality doesn't exist. Competition exists. Competition is where items or aspects of life that need refurbishing get demolished by the thing that's good. Natural and unnatural selection at its finest. If you think equality exists, it's because you're bad at measuring. Two rulers are not the same size. You just think they are because your measuring tools suck. If you are able to create equality at such a high degree, at such a high level, you positively impact everyone else because now people know that's possible. Better and worse exist. If everyone's life is worth the same value, then what is a nation state? And what is family? It's quite obvious we hold different standards for those people which you exclude out of your circle, not only personal living quarters, but even anyone regionally near you. It seems slightly absurd that people are so cowardly and so fearful of finding better in their life that they're willing to brainwash and convince themselves that better doesn't even exist, can't be measured, and therefore whatever they're doing is already awesome because there's no such things as better, just different. Computers are better calculators than abacuses. OLED screen is better than the LCD screen. And if you want documents to last a long time, the pen is better than the pencil. And if you want to hear loud music, some speakers are better than others. Better and worst exists. We can look at this from another perspective also. One could take the whiny, irritated complaint about the world position, or take a more advanced position that explains how lucky are you that you get to build free, yes, momentum and free authority by building off of something simple that these people already actually know to be true. And so how lucky are you that you can win a seemingly contentious point easily by showing that better and worse obviously exists, and then building upon it for your next thing. So you had to build yes momentum anyway. You had to get an opposing argument to pre-commit to agree with you anyway by finding that first common ground. How lucky are you that the first common ground is so easy to find? If you want to talk about how unfair the world is, it is designed in such a way that two pieces of matter couldn't exist in the same space at the same time. This means there's literally an enforced uniqueness of one thing per location. How can that possibly be fair? That thing's location has got to be slightly better or worse than someone else's. Time and space itself starts out as unfair, so stop looking for fairness. Finnish women live on average 6 years longer than men. That's 77.8 to 83.8 years. Where's the Scandinavian equality everyone is clamoring for? The silly search for equality and other pattern-finding tendencies, often you will see patterns where none exist. It can be useful and it can be harmful. The lion is not the tiger, and the antelope is neither still. No one cares about those far-off years. Everyone cares about today. So let's make today kick ass. Let's work on vanity for fun. If girls can pay thousands a month to plaster over wrinkling skin, they can surely pay to have genuinely wrinkle-free skin without the makeup. The fallacy of the golden rule. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. We are not all the same. We should not all be treated the same. Some things that you would love, others would hate. Roller coasters, gluten, etc. Inflation versus deflation. When you're looking at economic policies or policies in general, really, it's a bit conceited to want the same things for everyone else that you want of yourself. Take, for instance, inflation versus deflation. Most would prefer deflation for their currency, wanting its value to go higher and higher. For everyone else, however, you may prefer that theirs go lower and lower, because it will amplify the amount of trade and creation that those people in that economic situation create. I think that, overall, inflation is great because it robs from the hoarding people who don't want to give their money to someone else for goods and services. Inflation works like the memory of someone else, where you lend them your lawnmower, and then you have to borrow your own lawnmower back from them. That's what inflation is. The world owes you something because you have the money that you worked hard for, but as long as you don't claim the favor back, it erodes over time until you are owed nothing anymore. Hold for too long, and you can't afford to buy anything with the money that you saved because of the inflation. Ego is the power other people have over you. Significance is the power other people have over you. How the isms and itties affect real world. In an endless sea of perspectives, but with limited knowledge and limited time to improve, measure, and compare our models of the world, it is best to choose the perspective which profits you the most. Let me give you an example. One could make two statements that are obviously true and yet contradictory. Look before you leap, and he who hesitates is lost. Or, money is the root of all evil, and he who has the money makes the rules. Or, the early bird catches the worm. And some euphemism about patience. How about don't put all your eggs in one basket versus put all your eggs in one basket and watch it very carefully? All of these perspectives could ring true depending on circumstance. Most notably, the circumstances pertaining to your ability to execute one or the other based on your own skill set. Choose your perspectives wisely. Personal beliefs. Horoscopes. The zodiac and the concept of horoscope dividing everyone on Earth into 12 groups and then giving them some vague crap predictions about their futures is pretty stupid. Do you really think that if such predictions were true, that all of mankind could be divided into 12? And why can't you ask for better details? Why isn't anyone named specifically like, XYZ dude is going to shoot up a school today? Superstition. It's funny how superstitious we are. With chain letters. Post in this thread or your mom will die in her sleep tonight. Step on a crack, break your mama's back. And those obviously false little hints surely do inspire action. What are the odds? Hitchens and Dawkins appear to be impressed by the argument that the odds are so against us existing that it seems the game is rigged for us to exist. This is just confirmation bias. Just as any horse picker can send out 100 pieces of mail choosing a winner, then another 100, then another 100, and some random person will be the recipient of 4 picked winners in a row. That's because the cost of picking a winner at random is about 0. That's why trustable signaling needs to be costly. Just because the universe tried something 1 zillion times in a row and you just happened to have received the letter that was all winners in a row, doesn't mean it was built for you. Also, how special would you consider the living beings that dominated this planet for thousands of times longer than you? Dinosaurs? And how did that work out for them? Fate and control. If you believe that you don't have much control over your life, you become discouraged. Because if you don't have any control, you can't make anything better. If you can't ever improve anything, well, your life might not be fulfilling. Now, what if you had a different belief? even a belief that you had to stretch to make fit. A belief that you did control certain things in your life, even if you really didn't. But you could slightly influence them, and you called it control. What kind of effect would that have? As an example, let's say you didn't want to get hit by a car. What could you do? You could not be around cars and live on an island without them, or you could travel at night when there's not so many cars around. Or if you're driving your own car, you could paint it bright yellow. There are 100 options you could try that wouldn't actually cost that much, that would greatly reduce the chance that you ever experience a car accident. And that same type of creativity and responsibility can apply anywhere in your life. You have a drinking problem? What's the problem? Alcohol is near your hand grabs it and puts it in your body. How do we get the hand further from the alcohol? You could chop your hands off, or you could go somewhere where there isn't alcohol, or you can find an empowering meaning that you felt stronger about through deep soul searching than the reason you are reaching for the drink. More people in the world need to take responsibility for what's happening to them in their own lives. Responsibility for oneself is absolutely massive. So if you want to live longer, then maybe watching the Discovery Channel is not enough. Maybe being part of what the Discovery Channel is covering would be better. And is that not an option? Can you not invest in one of the stocks? Can you not put 5% of your money into one of these companies that could one day save your life? That responsibility is a very strong part of the argument. Tony Robbins' limiting beliefs. If you don't think you have any, you just found your first one. Electric cars, excellence, habits, meditation. The risk to reward ratio during advancement gets crappier and crappier for any kind of improvements in life. By definition, doing better in life implies that you have already obtained more of the set of the good stuff, which is a finite set, whereas you have had the minimum of the bad stuff in the risk category, and therefore the farther along you go, the easier it gets to find things in the much more underachieve risk set, and the harder it is to make gains in the farther success set. For example, should you try psychedelic drugs to become more creative? If you already have a great mind, perhaps you lose your drive, or have a really bad trip, and you go from a nice, productive guy that only wanted to create cooler and better ideas for the world through a creativity assister, a chemical, but you end up like the Unabomber instead, really intelligent yet dangerous and evil. Now, is that to say it's a common outcome for people that have tripped? Tripped meaning that a person has had a psychedelic experience. Well, how much do you want to risk? If you are already inadequate and are likely to continue to be, perhaps you have more to gain by risky changes to brain chemistry or risky experiences that you may enlighten the world about. For a better analogy, if you're already dating a supermodel who loves you, is honest and caring, and can be a great mother, how much do you gain by trying to upgrade, and how much do you risk? Surely you can come up with a scenario where you would suggest to someone that they not mess up a good thing. You will find that the validity of that advice increases the better the good thing is, and the more likely the inverse is to become the reality, or have more tragic amplitude. This is why SciVive has no interest in suggesting what is so commonly suggested by many others in regards to sensory deprivation tanks, or gurus, or meditation, or all of the other new age and rarely effective isolation behaviors. If you want trance and alteration of consciousness, the least risky way to get there is dance, chanting, singing. It occupies the mind and feels good. Some young folks like to combine those things with some chemicals like MDMA and claim to have the same near-soulful experiences of those on more psychedelic substances. If meditation was so badass, why are the Tibetan monks not crushing it on the world stage? Most inventions, the best health, best science, and most advanced philosophy, or fastest rates of progress in economic, culinary, and musical areas are not usually attributed to monk lifestyle. They're rather stagnant and getting stomped by nearly everyone else that doesn't meditate. Well, why would one want to adopt and or maximize what appears to be an ineffective behavior in one's own life, so that one may trade real-world useful behavior and growth for the illusion of usefulness? Is it better to trick yourself into thinking that you're doing great things, when in reality you're sitting uselessly, leeching the resources and productivity out of the other people in the world that actually keep you safe and develop the music and literature you might enjoy, only to give little to nothing back in return except perhaps the observable warning you leave that life truly can be wasted? Not realizing your underachieved status is one way to do it, and enhances the likelihood that you continue to underachieve until the day you die. You found a way to be content with sucking and continue to lie to yourself about your own reality. If you're not going to give back to the world that brought you into it and gave you roads to walk on, understandings to learn and benefit from, a nice language to speak, beautiful art and music to immerse yourself in, and a body not riddled with bullet holes or under Nazi government control, you are an ass. Many good men fought and were tortured and died so that you could have the rather awesome quality of life that you get to enjoy today. And meanwhile, you disrespect their sacrifice and quite literally throw your life in the garbage and waste it by giving little to nothing back. To what degree are you doing these people a favor by allowing their enduring pain or achievements to go unnoticed? You don't help them or anyone else by speaking well of things that are sick. Improper tolerance or ignorance of the real effects that occur in this world because the decisions people and religions and belief systems cause to be executed is the road to damnation. Perhaps the Tibetan pacifist monks actually did do something to free the world of Nazism and genocide. One would have to say it seems unlikely they were useful. If you're looking for people who take more than they give and aren't doing what they should or could to make this world a better place, you really don't need to look far. The jails have tons of them behind their bars, and perhaps we are all guilty of this impropriety ourselves from time to time. Let's call the crap what it is, find it and cut it out wherever reasonable. Some experimentation in the areas of usefulness is actually useful. However, it should be kept to a minimum, for the likelihood that useless behavior remains useless is greater than the likelihood that a discovery is made. Frameworks, behaviors, robustness, triggers. Frameworks. These ideas, these things, these side benefits that come from smoking, you would only discover them if you know how to ask the right questions. Now, one framework that is useful for asking these types of questions is an incorrect framework, which is a good third-party framework that has shown to actually analyze a behavior, see what the side benefits that are useful are, and try to replace it with another behavior that meets those same benefits at a lower cost or at a higher enjoyment level. Let's compare two frameworks for analyzing human needs. By the way, these human needs things, 1, presuppose that human beings have these needs, which is up for debate. 2, they presuppose that those needs are constant and not ever changing. There's a whole other set of lines to the human being, which is the most conscious, rather, the most complicated conscious, living, thinking entity that we're aware of in the universe. To think that such a thing only has, in Maslow's hierarchy of needs, 7 or 8, however of them are in there, or in Tony Robbins' contrived world, human invented, not really well researched scientifically system of needs. Let's put Maslow's hierarchy of needs in regards to analyzing the side benefits of smoking, or even call them all benefits. There's no reason to call them side. We only call them side because they're benefits to people that might miss, oh, it feels good. Well, is there anything else it does? You know, scratching your back feels good too, but it appears to be less addictive than smoking, so there's obviously something else going on there. Here's Maslow's hierarchy of needs versus cigarettes. Okay, are cigarettes food? No. Shelter? Nope. Self-actualization? Maybe you could stretch that one in there. Love? No. So far in this exercise, we're not really getting a whole lot of useful detail out of applying Maslow's hierarchy of needs to the behavior of smoking. What you'll find is you won't get much of a benefit out of applying Maslow's hierarchy of needs to anything, which is a reason when you're done learning them in school, you never see them again. That stuff is too remedial. If there were huge swarms of people out there who weren't able to self-actualize, weren't able to find shelter, and weren't able to eat, then that framework would be much more useful. However, since you as a person are lucky enough to read this book, you probably already have shelter and aren't using the book to shield yourself from the rain. Then you need to use the framework that's more applicable. Maslow's is hard to apply in the real world. So let's look at Tony Robbins. Tony believes that there's certainty and variety, significance and connection, and those things are all paradoxical. So if you become too significant, people remove connections. If you become too needy, then people don't think you're important. You lose significance. And the same goes for certainty and variety. If you do the same thing all the time, then it's boring because you're not getting variety. If all you ever have is adventure and craziness, then you may develop a post-traumatic stress because you don't have enough certainty. Then he would like to believe that growth and contribution are the two needs of spirit, and not the four previous needs of the personality or identity. Now, it's interesting enough that Robbins is in the business of selling personal growth, and it would be pretty awesome if people had that as a need. Their most fulfilling of needs, and the more time they spent on growth and contribution, the more fulfilled they would be. Consequently, since we have finite time, the less time they spent with certainty, significance, variety, and connection. So, SciVive doesn't agree with Robbins' system completely, though the system is still more applicable than Maslow's and is still very useful. Why bother mentioning this to you? You will find framework of understanding, categorization, and maximization that allow you to build categories of things and look through that lens at something. Some of those frameworks are useful, some of them are not. If you have an infrared camera and you're in the Arctic and everything is the same temperature, it's not that useful. There's nothing to be really looking at. If you have an infrared camera and you're in a wooded area and there are animals that are generating heat, then the infrared camera is much more useful. And in that environment, infrared is a great lens to look through because the animals will stick out massively. What you discover is just like animals can hear at different frequencies, they can see at different frequencies. Some can see polarization while human beings can't. Some animals can see into the infrared. Human beings can't. Actually, with surgery in the future, you might be able to, but currently you cannot, and you probably wouldn't want to anyway. If you look out into space, infrared is really useful. If you're looking at whether people have viruses and their immune systems is responding with a fever and you want to quarantine them if there's a swine flu epidemic, it's really cool to have an infrared thermometer that you can just point at someone's mouth without having physical contact with them. If you need to make a new non-virus contracting method that allows you to see in other people's mouths, then infrared is awesome. However, if you are a normal human being and not really so concerned with the temperature of everything around you, you just care about friend or foe, edible, not edible, things like that, maybe it's more useful that you don't see in the limited infrared spectrum. So what's the point? Organizing the world and looking through that lens of organization has a massive effect in your ability to act and perceive. The frames and lenses which you use to see the world directly affect the number of actionable behaviors that are presented for you. If you're a musician and any new thing that happens to you, you perceive the lens of timing, amplitude, and timbre, then you're going to be accumulating excellence in that area which you might be able to execute in the future. However, if you're constantly focused on the way things sound, and you're listening as hard as you can with your eyes closed, you're going to be missing out on much of the visual world. Therefore, you're likely to be a mediocre artist because you're less good at color and only focused on audio. Perhaps this is the reason that most musicians aren't great painters. Perhaps this is the reason that most great book writers aren't great painters or great musicians. To be a polymath and amazing at more than one thing is pretty hard to do. It really takes all of your consciousness and all of your focus on a single thing. To become amazing at it? Well, you don't need to do two things great. You only get to do one thing great. Thus, you must choose very carefully the lenses you use to see the reality, the frameworks, shortcuts, prejudices, and pigeonholing of people and categorizing of people. All of those things that you use to understand the world that you live in, and it's more than understand it. If your eyes see a thing, then you start to assign meanings and beliefs to the thing. In this world, you actually don't get to control what your eyes even see. And so, you not only have the filter of belief and the filter of meaning, but you also have the choice as to what even gets put into that filtering system. Thus, choose the most powerful and useful belief systems. hopefully ones that have been proven to be useful for others. Values, meanings, shortcuts of categorization, shortcuts of prejudice, shortcuts of wanting to be good at these things and no other things. Those calculations will make huge impacts and differences in your life, and since we don't exist in a vacuum and much of our consciousness is affected by our family, our friends, and who we spend time with, when you hear commonly held beliefs, such as the amount of money you make is the average of your 4 best friends, you may think, why is that? Because those are the people that are going to affect what you focus on, what you do, and what you see as actionable behavior based on the inputs that you allow into your mind. Whatever allowed them to achieve success is likely to rub off on you. And so, not only are your beliefs, your values, and what you focus on an influencing factor in your life, but so are the people that are nearest to you, because they will trigger you in ways that may be both positive and negative. If you spend time with friends that are rather free-flowing with new things, they want to tell you about all the new things they want to believe. The less specific and less scientific they are about it, their 1 hour of watching something believable and interesting on television turns into 12 hours of you disproving it for them. You develop with that person an asymmetrical relationship, which is a little bit okay for an author, but unless you're harnessing that energy to benefit the world somewhere else, you can end up wasting a lot of time. You could say Tony Robbins' 6 human needs. Psychology is much very useful psychology for needs, but it's very wishful. For instance, certainty and variety could also be called fear and greed, because variety just means do different from what you're currently doing, which is caused by greed, and then only doing the same thing that you've been doing is caused by fear. Another thing to say is that those 2 definitions are so vague as to apply to all behaviors, which is basically do the same thing or do a different thing. Now, there's a lot of people that don't really ever try different things, and so the needs of growth and contribution, you could say, are very wishful. Now, perhaps he says that growth and contribution are optional, but those other 4, certainty, variety, significance, and connection, perhaps he refers to them as the needs of the identity. He also states that one of the most important needs that you have is to remain consistent with what you think your identity is, which is interesting, because perhaps that would also have to be called certainty. However, it really seems like a cop-out because any complex system, particularly a human being, probably has a lot more than 4 inputs and weightings that it's using to measure and controlling the actions it takes. To tell you the truth, that's what feelings and emotions are. If you were going to say that human beings had needs, which could be a misnomer, you must question that we even have needs. Maybe just have behaviors. Side benefits of behaviors. Let's say you want to change your behavior. Behaviors have a side benefit. There was a study done on people who claimed they had cancer even though they really didn't, and they tried to figure out why someone would lie about something that is so important. What they discovered was that part of the reason someone would lie about having cancer when they didn't have it was because it was the only time that their family called, and it was the only time that they felt important, and it was the only time that they felt part of their family's lives. So that problem, the terrible problem, they had to will into seeming to exist in the real world because it paid in real world benefits. Same with smoking. It pays real world benefits. It gives you a temporary excuse to stop doing something that you dislike. It gives you an excuse to go out with people and talk to them when you may otherwise feel uncomfortable by not having a common activity to perform with them. It gives you the ability to perform a ritual, which makes you look cool to other people, and allow you to feel cool through having this ritual and good marketing on behalf of the tobacco companies to make it look cool so that you can be associated with the Marlboro Man, a tough and rugged persona who needs nothing, who's very useful and powerful and confident. Robustness. You can't enforce optimal, charitable choices amongst all the citizenry. Humans are built to be robust, and robustness requires that we all have slight differences in desires and efficacy so that we can find optimal paths, or create them where they can be made. If everyone felt the same way about everything, it would leave us open to more risk and less excellence. Living things have mutations to find excellence. We have experimentation, and we all have chance and luck. If you're curious, the relationships that you should have with behaviors that make you feel different, whether that's singing songs you like, or reading cool, interesting facts and news, or being around people that respect you and make you feel good, you should really take a look at how your body and your psychology respond to increasing dosages of those things at increased frequency. You might find that there's a minimum effective dose. For example, there might be a minimum effective dose for singing or friendship. Then, as you go over that minimum effective dose, you get diminishing returns. And as you go beyond diminishing returns into the negative, now your voice doesn't work anymore because you sang too loud for too long. Now your friends are bored of you because you are around them too long. What's the point? In life, your body is a self-correcting, self-regulating, basically conscious actor. Without stretching the use of the word conscious too far, it has its own agenda, whether it's conscious of it or not, and it wants you to do things a certain way. What would you do if you wanted to create an Elon Musk 20 years before he was born? How would that occur? It would be very useful to have a great school for him to be able to attend. Apparently, it would be very useful to have some interesting science fiction for him to read and enjoy. Then, later on in life, the existence of a science-related, massively profitable IPO and public company exists, along with capitalism, would allow such a man to execute his dreams without the assistance of the government in some cases. If one were to ask you 20 years before he was born the best way to create him, would science fiction have made it into your answer? And would venture capital have made it into your answer? Is it likely that the next Elon Musk that gets created 20 years from now will be influenced by the same exact set of things? Or will something occur between now and 20 years from now when said person is identified through success to be what it is that you wanted to create? And is he of the right framework? Are there other people that have arrived at excellent behavior outcomes through separate inputs? Further still, can great outcomes be had without the hero worship and cult of personality that follows a single individual? Or is it that one human accomplishes so much without a following that actually paves the way of progress in this world? Know thyself and thy potential. There are two things that aren't fair. One is that you are too cowardly to admit how great any human being's potential can truly be, and that any one of us with enough dedication and drive could truly impact millions of people's lives, both today and in the future, through creation of film, book, music, the spreading of a unique idea. There's so many ways that we can affect those near us and in perpetuity into the future, and it's unfair to not be aware of that. It's also unfair to focus on something that is so hard, nearly unobtainable for much of the world, and to feel bad if you don't obtain that. There is art and magic to knowing what you are capable of, and what is reasonable or even unreasonable, but worth trying to do, and still feel good while failing, because you are going to fail a lot along the way. In explanation, there is what you can and can't do, and there is what you think you can and can't do. It would be a miracle if you were completely correct in knowing what you could or couldn't do. Thus, we must all take calculated risks and reach as far as our arms will allow to see what we might grasp. We can stand on the shoulders of friends and the great men that came before us and reach higher than we ever thought possible. Shakespeare had a nice turn of words when he said, "Do not find yourself, create yourself." Silicon Valley is about getting rich by giving people what they want or could be addicted to, instead of what they should want. Sadly, the battle to better the common man is costly, and where should the money come from to do it? Ideally, businesses could find a way to empower people for profit rather than weaken people for profit. The mindless numbing of our future generations is truly a tragedy. When you listen to music, to some degree, that's what you're doing. You are executing someone else's software for you. When you watch a movie, you are executing someone else's software for you. You hope they have positive intentions for you. You hope that they want you to have positive experiences, because we have good peer review, they usually do, which can warn you if a particular piece is garbage. You might listen to a friend's movie review and reply, "Oh, you watched it and it wasn't good? Thanks for saving my time." But in the end, you're living someone else's life. You're living what they gave you through their advice, their lensing. Maybe it's a wonderful gift, or maybe at some point you've run out of time now. You may have enjoyed the ride, but no one else will get you to enjoy your ride now. You had a chance to build a nice ride for the rest of the world, to make the world a better place, to give back to the people that gave to you. You had the chance, and instead you just took and never gave. You ate up the music, you ate up the language, you ate up the education, you ate up the recipes, and then you took it with you when you died. You didn't give anything back. If you don't show people the detriment of their ways, and there is profit in them executing those ways, they will certainly run those programs. If people see profit in being corrupt, they will do it. It's one's duty to show them a better way. Stop living everyone else's program for you. Build your own program. Stop absorbing everyone else's content to the exclusion and deletion of yourself. Have balance. Give and take. Absorb, build, mix, extend, expand. Give back to the world. To be or not to be? To be or not to be, that is the question. Whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to take arms against a sea of troubles, and by opposing end them, to die, to sleep. Hamlet by William Shakespeare. Most men lead lives of quiet desperation and then go to the grave with a song still in them. Henry David Thoreau, Civil Disobedience and Other Essays. Whatever it is you are trying to do to make a big impact on the world, you are going to be faced with challenges. You are going to need to have internal drive and self-reliance, or an exceptionally helpful peer group that can help you get to that level. I used to wish my father had made a larger impact on the world. I wished he were the descendant of some type of royalty, noble upbringing or lineage. In reality, my father is a hard-working, loving, caring, honest man who has worked hard every day of his entire life. I really mean every single day. I wouldn't want to rob him of the potential to do something even more amazing with his life by just not thinking enough of him to even think it possible, nor do I want him to feel even the slightest bit of sadness for choosing to lead an honest, hard-working life. As you grow up, you have so much that you want. You want your freedom. You are tired of so many people having so much power over you. Due to the luck of the draw, some of you will have great parents, some not so great, and some none at all. Some of you will get great advice, some terrible, and some only silence. Great news! You are about to get some life-changing advice. There exists a duality of death and how it relates to courage. Some people have the courage to face death and fight for their country or perform other courageous acts. Other people may lack the courage to face life's challenges and instead are cowards and choose death over continued struggle. It's an odd duality that in one case the courageous person may die anyway, for example in a war, and in one case the courageous person lives. Humanity's courage to discover the world is eventually inevitable. That is obvious and will happen regardless of whether we want it to or not, in pursuit of places where we may live longer and find new ways of life as we always have. In this case, death due to exploration of the unknown is a courageous action, and in this case the cowardly action occurs when one chooses death over struggle and expansion. In our needlessly early and perhaps painful death that comes as a result of not putting up a fight and pretending that bad things aren't going to happen and that nothing can be done about them. That pretending is cowardice. If you think the lives of yourself and the people like yourself are worth more, consider these things instead. Being a man or a woman is a unique experience, and your life and thoughts are likely to not be exactly like anyone else that has ever existed. Because of that, it would be quite silly to waste time writing a book that everyone was supposed to read the same way. Some people, perhaps you, will benefit from reading some parts of this book more than others. Perhaps the order in which you consume this information improves digestion based on your unique perspective and life experience. Perhaps the two major themes are feeling versus reason. Art is feelings and science is reason. There are other giant ones in here, like religious versus non-religious, rich versus poor, tit for tat versus tit for two tats, political orientation, gender, so many variables. Perhaps this is why books are rarely written from a race-gender perspective. Maybe the authors just weren't flexible enough. If it is the case that this type of unique specialization in framing similar concepts is possible, then it should be demonstratable on a small scale. Do you believe that you should have the right to have kids? Do you believe it was a good thing that you were born? Do you believe you have the right to decide who else is allowed to have kids? Do you believe in the right for an individual to have a chance at life, perhaps even a chance at a good life? You would be surprised at the range of opinions here. Hard questions. Is being overweight dangerous to your health? If your health is impaired by self-abuse, should you have the right to medical care? Is it reasonable then that those whose lives you will impact and time you will consume through being sick have a right to impose healthy things on you because you will be screwing them over with your risky behavior or unhealthy eating? Should you have the ability to opt out of the social safety net because you're comfortable doing unhealthy and risky things and didn't ask anyone to take care of you? Should the present day you be able to make that decision for future you? Who gets to be the health czar? If health is such an important part of life and it can be influenced with science, why don't we mandate a science production quota or labor quota, as we do forcing kids to learn other languages? There is a line that must be drawn between what it is worth to sacrifice for and for how much sacrifice. Here is a gigantic one. How many lives is your life worth? Would you die for your kids, your parents? How about 3 random people or 3 schoolmates? What about 2 guys you barely knew? 2 girls? 2 kids that weren't yours? What would you answer to this question in public? Versus what would you do if no one ever knew your decision? The answers to these questions are really important, and there are people making exactly these answers every day, whether they realize it or not. You probably know some of the easier answers for yourself. You believe your life is worth the most, but perhaps that will change when you have kids. For now, you must exist. Then comes your loved ones, your mate, then your kin, then people you like, then people you know, then everyone else. Some people would put animals pretty high on this list as well. One wouldn't be surprised if many people put animals before people they would never meet. What research gets funding? Which countries get invaded? Is non-vaccination punishable by law? How punishable? How far should dragnet surveillance actually go? Is there an objective method by which you could know which of these personal beliefs cause the best emergent outcomes for all participants in the system? Could it perhaps be a mixed, evolving belief where people had different ones at different times would be best? It seems as though that is how life is designed. You go from an all-powerful God to a God that leads and cares and is merciful, but you can't start there. You have to go through Power God first. Do you matter? If it is the case that 1% of the world owns 90% of the stuff, then it's quite likely that the 1% gets to decide what the other 90% do with their time, more or less. As such, if you want to make an impact in the world, then you probably need to start and finish with the 1%. Now here's an odd fact. If you didn't know it, if you make over $31,000 per year, you are in 1% of the world. I find that knowing what percentage of the planet's wealth is stored in different owners is probably less valuable than knowing which small groups in that large group you can successfully influence. Hell, there are probably some groups in there that will actively try to bring you harm if they discover that what you are doing might cost them their money. What kind of person would you like to be? Some think that you and your loved ones or your friends are worth more than people you will never meet. One is not usually willing to accept death or let one's own family die because seamen somewhere else are having a bad time. Lucky for us, the rising tide usually rises all ships. These things we do to help ourselves will almost always help others, not including some exceptions to that rule like property rights. If you have the right to kick other people off a piece of land, then you having that power is nearly exclusive of anyone else having it. In that case, we really do have a battle of powers. The illusion of importance. For many successful people, they misattribute, along with many of their peers, the importance they actually have to the company they founded or currently manage. Whether your company is doing good things or not has much more to do with how you appear compared to your peers, in that, if your peers suck, it's very easy to look like a winner. However, if your peers are ass-kicking machines, then even though ideally you should be happy with your performance, the market may starve you out of existence. Bill Burr has a pretty funny skit on how he thought Steve Jobs was a douchebag, and now that he's gone, look how the company has gone to shit. In reality, it was the hard work of many, many other people that allowed those things to be created. And if he truly was integral to the company's well-being, should not the company be in dire straits now? When you analyze someone, you may want to say a bunch of things to them that make you sound insightful, as though you are able to identify specific traits in that person because you have a greater understanding. That then would give them credence to believe more of the things that you said. Good liars mix in a lot of truth. The maximum amount of truth and the minimum amount of lies. Because if they test you, you pass more of the test because there's more truth density. Bullshit artists do the same thing when they're bullshitting you. They tell you as many non-testable, good-sounding things that they can so that they can get cool points and pass through more of the bullshit, which doesn't pass the tests. What are some standardized, feel-good, complimentary, sound-smart, intellectual, mumbo-jumbo false truths that you can tell people that they love to hear? Because people have found profit in believing that they are unique, special, and deserve great resources, particularly more resources than people who aren't them, that may not be as great. They believe that consciousness is something that is hard to understand, hard to measure. Confidence leads to excellence. Adopt increased behavioral variance and follow through volatility. Mutations that allow for variation and robustness are the result of lacking self-doubt. The more self-doubt that you have, the less decisive you are. The longer you remain in a non-mutated state, and thus the less variation in behavior you will have. Thus, the less likely you are to become an outlier or have legendary robustness. This is closely related to analysis paralysis and the opposite of ready, fire, aim. Fake it till you make it. The fundamental cause of the trouble is that in the modern world, the stupid are cocksure, while the intelligent are full of doubt. One of the painful things about our time is that those who feel certainty are stupid, and those with any imagination and understanding are filled with doubt and indecision. Quote from Bertrand Arthur William Russell, New Hopes for a Changing World, 1951. The best lack all conviction, while the worst are full of passionate intensity. Quote from W.B. Yeats, The Second Coming, 1919. To understand the actual world as it is, not as we should wish it to be, is the beginning of wisdom. Quote from Bertrand Arthur William Russell. Don't be a scammer. It takes a lifetime to build a reputation and only minutes to ruin it. Most great scammers could have been greater business people instead. You put yourself at odds with the most powerful tool any wealthy person has, the law. Pay attention to what other people say about your attitude. It's easier for them to see what you're doing than it is for you. You can't even see your own face. You're too busy doing the feeling to notice that you're doing it. It's funny to watch people act like they're happy or fulfilled when you can tell they're not. It's like when your girlfriend tells you nothing's wrong when you ask her what's wrong. Only after you beg, plead, and cry might you find out what was indeed wrong. Most people are bad actors. Trolley problem, morality, decision-making, values. The trolley problem is going to actually be executed in cars as decision logic. Back to the trolley problem. Let's say you wanted to use brute forcing and creativity to create a realistic set of possible factors which you could or should factor into your decisions regarding the value of human life, the difference between persona action and inaction. the response of other parties in the future to the survivors of the event, and getting caught or not caught, etc. You'll find that when you make it a specific goal to achieve, to expand the number of factors that you consider, and the parties to which those factors could apply. Let's give it a whirl, so to speak. Parties, person to be tested, we'll call this poor bastard testee. In this analysis, as in so many other paradoxical questions, it seems as though the truly useful data is left out of the question. Why should you value all human lives at the same value, which we already know you do not? This is the reason you don't let strangers into your home, because they are worth less than your family and worth less than yourself. You'll find that you're much more likely to allow people into your home that you would like to make love to, or are friends with, etc. Thus, it's quite obvious that you have a process by which you are used to deciding which other people in this world are worthy of sharing what little time, space, or things you have with. Now, this thought experiment of a trolley could be a bad example to start with, because we know much more about trains than trolleys in the Western world, as they're much more common and faster and more dangerous, thus a much better educational tool. The experiment goes, if a runaway trolley was rushing toward 4 workmen working on that track that would be unable to escape, and you could flip the switch, causing the track to switch to a different track where a single worker wouldn't be able to escape, would you flip the switch? Now, what if instead of being at the switch, there was a fat man on a bridge over the tracks, and you were standing near him? And you could push this fat man over the side, and somehow magically this would prevent the other 4 people dying. What a silly idea. Fat men, nor cows, nor cars are known to make much difference in the speed of an oncoming train whatsoever. Anyway, for the sake of this poorly designed thought experiment, let's grant them their assumptions. Would you push that fat guy? Here is what should go into your considerations. If the fat man's friends and family detect that you have murdered their fat man, they're going to rightly punish you and use the state to punish you for manslaughter. You can't allow the silly people of this world to kill other people because they thought it was useful for someone else to do so. If people believed that their estimate of a greater good allowed people to be murdered, wow, you'd have a whole lot of murdered people. It turns out that no man knows the future well enough to know that those other people couldn't have escaped the train. The train wouldn't have been otherwise derailed. The people you thought you saw were actually dummies, and this was a test of some part of the train and not real lives in danger. Or that the impact, if unavoidable, would be fatal. Perhaps they all might just lose a leg. Therefore, some might see this thought experiment being rather poorly formed for the following reasons. You must not act, for you operate from incomplete knowledge. You must not act, for you will personally be punished much more harshly than you will be rewarded. The 4 you think you saved won't pay you enough or protect you enough from the peers of the one that you killed, or law enforcement. The fat man wasn't doing something risky and stupid. He was only crossing a bridge, specifically out of the way of the train, whereas those other men earned their fates by not respecting the train tracks, as is required by law and common sense. If you chose the 1 over the 4, haven't you increased the chance that 4 more people will make a life-threatening decision by making someone else pay for their risky behavior? If the reason this is a trolley moving at speed instead of something slower is to try and limit your time to think and get you to be more emotional and less logical, which some believe is the point, it's a great thing that we have books, dreaming, and education, so that when these pressing, time-sensitive issues arrive, we have already pre-calculated good action and good outcome beforehand. Other than learning that this is a poorly formed thought experiment, which is supposed to estimate how you as an individual value the weight of 1 anonymous person versus 4 anonymous people, against the idea that you will be guilty by action for saving 4, but killing 1, and guilty by inaction by allowing 4 to be killed, but not killing 1. One can only say that it seems quite stupid to combine someone's valuing of another's fitness in regards to fat or fit. Pretty much destroys the information you would get regarding the 1 death through action versus the 4 deaths through inaction. Couldn't you just more easily ask, how much less value do you see in fat people? Should they be punished for their lack of fitness? Perhaps if you didn't believe their answer, you could structure a superior thought exercise to derive true feelings on the matter. In the end, SciVive sees very, very little use for this poorly formed thought exercise. It's far too removed from reality. Really, for any reasonable thinker, the fat man should never be pushed. You will be guilty of manslaughter, and fat men don't stop trains, or even slow them to any useful degree. In regards to the 1 versus 4, you don't have the data you'd need to make a good decision. You don't know they couldn't escape, so you will yell and holler, but you won't perform an action that will once again lead you to your personal annihilation by the state for manslaughter. The law and society you live in has a much harsher penalty for causing harm through action personally than it does through watching as harm occurs, but being too much in shock to act. You'll do much less time in prison by non-action. Now, is it fair to care more about your time in prison, perhaps alive but incarcerated, than it is for you to care about those lives? Well, yes, one must say that it is. We hold these truths to be sacred and undeniable, that all men are created equal and independent, that from that equal creation they derive rights inherent and inalienable, among which are the preservation of life and liberty and the pursuit of happiness. Quote from the Declaration of Independence. If you believe the above line to be true, then you should value your own life as at least equal. You aren't risking your life on the tracks as they are, and you will be harshly punished for acting. Anyway, it is a poorly designed experiment with some interesting discovery that the state has already decided the matter for you, and people must pay personally for the risks they take. Friends and family of deceased will harm you more than friends and family of survivors, for vengeance has larger amplitude than favor. Those that will harm you are exponentially more dangerous than those that will help you are useful. The harm hurts more than the help feels good. SciVive would say that fixing the question and looking at the system are two important steps that seem to be left out of all the common teaching of logical thought. It seems like what's most common is to be more logically effective and tactical about the wrong questions, and not mindful of the system as a whole. Do not trust the question. Do not trust the data. Know your desired outcome in positive terms, and know the system. This is how you get superior answers to those that came before you, because logic on its own will not tell you to do these things at all. Logic is like a physical calculator. It only knows what you key into it. Your hammer won't ask you to use a different kind of nail, nor tell you how hard to swing it. If you want people to do something that isn't done often, it's really helpful to give a name to that action you want them to do. And if you can define the term, then it becomes a memory anchor in their mind, greatly enhancing the presence and identification and spread of the behavior in the wild. Words need to exist to quickly describe the specific pre-work that needs to be done before using the hammer of logic. We could also benefit from inventing a word for the specific action of knowing which tool to use for a thing. Very specifically, not requiring you need to know how to use it, but that it exists, and this is where it should be used. Tool sense. Every other important domain of knowledge has a title. The concept that problem solving as a domain or tool use as a domain doesn't have a title is stupid. Thus, know which tool is right for the job in your domain shall be called tool sense. Even if you don't know how to use the tool, you know it exists, what it's good for, why it should be used here, and therefore can find someone to use it. SciVive should coin a term for the meta layer of knowing when to use a tool. What is the layer before the tool? What would one search for to discover if such a word may already exist? And even if it does, if it were good, it would already be well known. Therefore, likely not good, and therefore likely needing made anew. What should one call this scope expansion step? System/brute forcing? Finding max quantity of? Parties and variables in the system/brute forcing, finding max quantity of? States or actions of the parties? Then creating the table of all possible outcomes, combining all the measurable outcomes, when all parties have all the states and all the actions they can perform in different orders and combinations and locations, etc., to create a giant, hard-to-understand mass of outcomes from which you may filter those that are most desired. Creating that table is how you beat lots of puzzles and logic questions and don't miss non-obvious answers because you can't miss an answer, because you have the largest possible set to choose from. Imagine you wanted to create a beautiful sculpture from a block of marble. If you start out with a small block, you get only a small sculpture where the detail is hard to see, and you don't have the space you need to execute your vision. If you choose a larger block of marble, you will end up with the fine details that people will enjoy with their naked eyes in person. If you start with a mountain, you may get Mount Rushmore. The point is, the smaller and less stuff you have to work with to create an idea, the less resistant to the elements and impressive your sculpture will be. Expanding your set of variables and possibilities and externalities accounted for in the work you do to find all the answers and outcomes possible to a situation is your block of marble. Similarly, while you will have a more lasting and impactful creation, just like a large sculpture, it will take you longer to create. Good, fast, cheap, you can have any two of the three. In statistics, they call this the probability space. Thinking from first principles. Logic is a tool, and knowing when, where, and with what input towards what end is outside its ability. Forget their question. Make a better question. If your first inclination upon hearing this trolley problem isn't to attempt to ascertain more relevant data about the parties involved, then you will be more unaware of the factors that you should be including in your analysis. For instance, if you believe that people should take responsibility for their own actions, and those people on the tracks chose to stand in that dangerous place. So the point is that you know you do believe in responsibility, and you know this would be a place where that belief should be used. However, you never notice that responsibility is part of the equation, because you're so forced on the restrictions of the problem and your role in it that you never arrive at thinking about what these people deserve outside the system of you and the train and your decisions, but what they have earned in the system that isn't mentioned, which is the system of deserving and responsibility. Thus, due to the very wide range of things that can and are push and pull, give and take, earn and not earn, fair and not fair in this world, one may believe it's entirely required that you take a moment to be mindful of all the surrounding, related, touching things that are tangential to what you're thinking about, without actually being the thing you're thinking about. This idea of mindfulness and holistic thought and being at least one extra level higher up and looking down on a wider problem, where the original parts become smaller parts of a larger functioning system, is how you make breakthroughs and discoveries that everyone else misses. Elon Musk calls this thinking from first principles. Sherlock Holmes said, "It's elementary, my dear Watson." Anyway, the summary is, if you ignore all the other parts that touch and influence and are near a thing, you'll rarely make the best decision about the thing. That's the kind of limiting logic that sees you remove one dictator and see two worse ones being imposed, or you stop doing one bad habit and instead pick up another bad habit which might have even been worse than the first. Nature abhors a vacuum. Oddly enough, think about why this specific phrase might exist. Power vacuum. If you see the whole system from one level higher, you learn the superior strategy of fulfilling the needs of the world under pressure, but choosing the thing that will fill the vacuum strategically before you tacitly create the vacuum and think your job's complete, only to have to come back to the issue once you've admitted your first attempt at fixing it was actually a failure, and hopefully this time doing the thing that is strategically correct and choosing the thing you want, instead of just excising the thing you know you don't want. In all matters where time to think exists, see the system around the thing. Choose what you want. Be strategic, not merely tactile, and you can solve a problem the first time. So this is very important. When someone doesn't completely agree with you off the bat, and has doubts, you need to know about that because you didn't do a good enough job. And you need to test that on other people to see their reactions the same. Let's handle the objections before they should occur outside the book. SciVive suggests you use your newfound wealth to play in the biotech space. You might save your own life. Sensitivity. Empathy. Empathy is often the privilege of the powerless. Patience is a minor form of despair, disguised as a virtue. Quote by Ambrose Bierce. The rage you feel when things aren't doing what you want them to do is useful for humans and animals. It's not useful for machines, not at all, and it hurts you. Your internal environment. Pain and pleasure programming. Ever wonder why your balls are barely noticeable until you hit them, and then the world has changed for the worse? It's because if your balls get taken out, you're out of the gene pool. So the amount of pain we feel is often related to how useful a thing is for our procreation, more than our survival. It's the survival of our unborn. Fighting. So I went to the warrior and scholar Kenpo karate school. And they would say some cool and smart stuff, like, the dragon needs to constantly prove itself, so it's always fighting and testing itself. But the dragon already knows that it would have won, so it doesn't need to fight. That was a cool saying. There's shit that you can take away from that. It's quite useful. You can avoid a lot of conflict by assuming the win. And whenever there's conflict, even when you win, your fucking hands are going to hurt a lot. And your clothes are going to get screwed up. Might be some police, might be some lawyers' fees. The fights you win, you don't really win. You still lose. You win more of the fight that you win. You lose less the fight you win, but you still lose. And if you don't believe that, get in 10 fights in a row and then see how you feel. Believe me, you'll feel beat up because you'll be beat up. Or you're in one of those experiments. Would you rather fight 40 horse-sized ducks or one duck-sized horse? Or the other way around? Patience. Patience is a minor form of despair, disguised as a virtue. Let's say that you default and execute a good tit-for-tat strategy, and someone makes you wait, or doesn't do what they said they would do. Now you feel that you have to punish that behavior. Yep, here's the bad part. You start executing the punishment and are experiencing a negative personal state yourself long before the punished is ever there to notice at all. And thus you have destroyed your own state of mind and your own well-being in order to execute a useful tit-for-tat revenge strategy, and in the end, all you have done is hurt yourself. Let's say the person you are interacting with is a real piece of trash. The kind of piece of trash that shuts down the moment you try to show them the error of their ways. Now, in the end, all you have done is negatively alter your emotions and your quality of life for that tit-for-tat strategy that doesn't even work in this case, because as already stated, they are a piece of trash. They feel no remorse, they have no empathy, and they're not interested enough in being excellent to care about your relationship, so they'll just fail out as soon as you raise your expectations and move on to their next victim. The low-hanging fruit is to learn to not treat machines like people, for they truly, genuinely don't dedicate a single thought regarding your rage and will not modify their behavior to avoid it. They are not conscious actors, and thank goodness, because if they were judgmental, imagine how they'd treat you based on your internet search history. Soul. Soul in and only in the brain. How can damage to the brain be consistent in its effect by location of injury? Yet in death, if you kill it all, somehow, you're cool, and you're just transported to an afterlife. After sleep. Like an afterlife. You're obviously too important to not be alive and active and conscious when you're sleeping. So every night when you go to sleep, there's another you that appears in heaven, and every time you doze off, another copy of you gets issued. Just as there's no afterworld for your sleeping self, there is no afterworld for your dead self. There is only one you, and it's here or nowhere. Soul shit. If everything that makes you what you think you are your behaviors, your feelings, your thoughts, your abilities, can be edited by transcranial magnetic stimulation or lobotomy, how likely is it that you will survive the complete destruction of your brain? It's funny that we think that we have bodies, when in reality we are bodies. Your soul. Is the likelihood that you perform a certain set of behaviors, if what you are likely to do changes your identity, and thus your very soul should change? For what is a person except thoughts and actions? Your identity and soul is nothing more than the likelihood that you think and act in certain ways in the present and future. Well, that's interesting. What about the permanence? What about that everlasting, undying thing which isn't meat and isn't your mind or body? That other third thing. Well, that is a fancy fantasy that makes you feel special and allows you to do better in the world. Those people that think they don't have a soul, they have a harder time of it. It can be harder for them to find happiness and harder for them to find meaning because there's this gap in understanding. Pride. The staircase, the ratchet, you. Winning can feel like losing. The curse of winning an auction. You won, yay! But now no one will pay more than you did because they would have if they had wanted to. So you basically just made sure that in the short term, barring an auction house that has bad marketing for bidders, you overpaid. Due to the ratcheting effect, the constant pressure of us to get bored and want more, this means that you've gotten your raise, you can't get another raise because you've maxed them out. So by winning, you feel loss. Appreciation. We live in magical times. Imagine a time in the not-so-distant past where there was no GPS navigation, no cell phones, no beepers, and no internet. Let's imagine humans were without television or radio. When you went to a place, that place was all you saw. There was no easy window to other realities. It was you, your surrounds, and your imagination. Maybe you had the stories told by those around you. Maybe you had your imagination. That's it. What a magical and different world we have today. The ability to fly to a faraway land for the price of a night in a hotel. We truly live in magical times. The analogy for sucking it up for the time being before you do the fun stuff. Nearly all of the great comedians and productive people that you find in the world weren't born with a silver spoon in their mouths. Some of which even had crappy jobs that were dead ends, like a dock worker, crappy retail, no room for advancement style jobs. Most of them fought and saved and studied their way into greatness, which means that you will need to fight and study your way into greatness by saving and building an intellect that has the traits that other people care about and are willing to pay for. Now, an easy way to analogize that is that as human beings, we all have to receive our nutrients through breastfeeding before we're old enough to chew. And nobody likes it, and nobody brags about it later in life, but at some point, we were all attached to our mothers, literally for survival. Programmed for laziness and internal conflict/lobbying. So we're talking about personal development and lobbying for what you want in the world. And then the internal lobbying you do with yourself by creating things that you'll actually do instead of the imaginary. These are all the things that I would do if I had the balls to actually do everything that I planned. You could call it infinite discipline, perhaps. It would require infinite time, but maybe you're not that creative. Maybe everything you'd ever want to do personally doesn't take that much time because you have a small standard for what must exist in your life. So there's a set of things that you tell yourself to do if you had infinite willpower to do everything, right? Do a set of max bench press. You know what? We'll just do a set of max on every muscle every other day, and then we'll split it and maybe split it in 3 push and pull-ups, whatever. And we'll only eat food that's flavorless, but has maximum health benefits. Omega-3s, proteins, and very little refined sugars, very little refined anything. Then we'll get the proper perfect dose of vitamin D. We'll get on down the list, doing all the perfect things. I'll call my mom this many times a year. I'll volunteer this many times a year, etc., etc. At some point, you discover you're not doing most of this, right? Why? Because laziness exists. You're programmed for laziness. Laziness has paid off great dividends by using less calories for hundreds of thousands of years, and so you're going to engage in laziness, right? So what do? We start knocking things off that set that you want to do, but you know you're not actually going to do. Then you get to level 3, which is, which of the things can you keep doing over time? So when you went to the gym twice and then you stopped, who cares? Oh, you went and learned 10 new words of a new language and then you stopped? Again, no one gives a shit. And then there are things that are even worse. There are things you can learn a little bit about, and you think that you actually know what you're talking about, but you have no clue. Maybe it is drug use. Maybe it is shooting firearms without knowing safety. Maybe it's driving like a race car driver. You think you're good at it, but now you're dead and wrapped around a pole, or worse, you've injured someone else's family because you think you're as good a driver as Lewis Hamilton. So what lesson is to be learned here? SciVive is telling you that there's an internal conflict inside ourself, which is the set of things you would do ideally, the set of things you'll actually do, then the smaller subset of things that you'll actually do over a long enough period of time to get the benefits you want. Then we have another smaller set called the things you convinced other people to do, and then that set gets run through the same shit that yours just did. All you did was add to their big list, and then it gets to their smaller list, and then it gets to their smaller sublists. And so the actual amount of shit you can convince people to do for a long enough period of time in their own life to improve their life is super small, and probably an order of magnitude smaller than what you can do for yourself. So force your brain to get something into your own psychology and program it, and do it long enough for it to become a lasting habit. The hard life of doing the right thing. It's pretty emotionally shocking when your good reasoning keeps making you need to be a hard ass and not do things you enjoy. It's a good thing we learn to love what we're good at, and the respect that comes with it. Cooperating with yourself to get shit done is the smallest version of collectivism. Collectivism works great, and the smallest unit of collectivism isn't a pair of people working together like friends. It's actually getting yourself to do work that you should do. Because this internal struggle between what you should do, what you can do, and what you actually do is a form of cooperation internal to yourself. So there should be a special half a human extra unit of cooperation that can occur internally. You, while making decisions, are not equal to 1. You're equal to at least 1.5. Standards. Belonging. Quote, not every place you fit in is where you belong. Settling. If you settle for the stuff that is just okay, you don't leave room for the really good stuff. Low expectations are the father of regret. Barely existing. Spirit. Most people live in a gray middle of shame and little honor and little based. That's why based is now a compliment. A world of people barely here. Desire. Dream high. Even the best of us could be doing better. Tony Robbins is the most successful success coach in the world. He could be creating copies of himself. He could have a curriculum in schools. He could be giving away his seminars for free instead of giving away food for free. He could be having a lasting and meaning impact on the world in the same scale that capitalism, Marxism, communism, religion, libertarianism, republicanism, socialism, being a Democrat, etc. However, he is not. Why doesn't he have much YouTube following? Why doesn't he have a podcast? Why doesn't he have a radio show? Why doesn't he have better quotes? Why hasn't his material improved in 15 years? Well, one could be guessing, but maybe Robbins doesn't want to risk the money. Perhaps he's run out of steam. He was a better organizer and presenter of others' ideas, but ran out of steam when he stopped absorbing from others. His height has left him starved for oxygen over time, and it's affected his creative thinking. He is exceptionally tall, standing at 6 feet 7 inches. Sex, money, power, or perhaps happiness? If you interview old people or middle-aged people about what advice they have for you when you're younger, The number of older men that will tell you to have as much sex as you can with as many young girls as you can is high, really high, which makes you wonder what really is important in life. Careers giving people what they desire is horrible. Imagine the only thing in this world is you and your house. You could either paint your house today, or you could build a chair. If you chose to paint your house, it will end up painted. If you choose to build a chair, you will end up with a chair. That's it, folks. That's the entire magic of careers. You will cause in the world what you choose to cause. This is where we are with most of the young smart folks of the world, working on the next best rate my sandwich application. People work for money. Money is exchanged for what people want, and what people want usually is often ridiculous. Thus, what people do with their time is also ridiculous as an effect of the first cause of humans having really stupid desires. If you are giving people what they want, you're very likely to be harming them, because what people want is quite often not what they should want. Create yourself. You can't be a great leader unless you learn to lead yourself first. Men are somewhat instinctive in noticing weak people. They don't like following weak people for the most part. A weak leader is likely no leader at all. The best. Quote, "The best lack all conviction, while the worst are full of passionate intensity." Yeats. Get addicted to winning. Winning is a journey, not a destination. Winning is a journey, not a destination. You ever wonder why some people do easily what you might find so hard to do? How did they get there? Was it an accident of chance? Did they perform some rite of passage that gave them lifelong access, seemingly effortlessly, to that which you have been unable to find your way to? How can some people be so productive and so happy and so loved by many? SciVive will tell you it's not magic. If you look into the histories of most of the most respected and influential people through history and today, you will find a common theme. Think about the hours they put in. How many hours they spent unrewarded, being made fun of, or broke and living in a van. Feel the win now. Feel the future. Get some easy wins, like speed wins. One trick you can use to shift the reward of what you are doing close enough to the present for you to enjoy doing it and feel rewarded working on it is to see how fast you can do it. And if something repetitive, you can see if you can beat your old time. This likely will restrict your creativity. This can be a good thing if what you are doing is repetitive enough. And let's be serious, much of what we need to do in life, we're putting 0 minutes into. Feel the future. If you're doing something great that leads in a great direction, dream a little in that direction. Take some of that future joy and bring it back into the present with yourself. Knowing the true value and joy at the end of the path will make you want to travel truer and faster down that path. The first minute of progress is the most important, for it is that minute that makes all the minutes that come after it possible. An object in motion tends to stay in motion. Get that first minute. So any subsequent minutes of nearly any quality will be more likely to get you into the hobby and then enjoy it, and then gaining a habit of doing what you need to be doing. Freedom to fail. More success begets more freedom. More freedom allows for more mistakes. You have no boss, and your old state that allowed success is not similar to the new successful state. You might start to believe your own bullshit. Permission to screw up. A life of success is a life of failure. The more opportunities to do good you have and try and experiment with, the more you will mess up. The only person who makes no mistakes is a dead person. Don't make problems you don't need. This is taken from an interview with Quentin Tarantino, and he said he got it from Harvey Keitel. It was an interview with Ridley Scott and Quentin and lots of other amazing directors on the Hollywood Insider. Like a good director, don't ruin someone's performance acting out a part for you that they have had to think about and work on. See what they have to show you, and redirect them as you wish. SciVive feels the same way about directing people's decisions in regards to their choice of career and education. It's great to see where they are at, and to try to figure out their motivations and needs that they are trying to meet with their decision. You'll find that you agree with several badass paths, and that arriving to agreement on their choosing of one of those several paths would be great, regardless of the specific need or reason that gets them to choose that good behavior. Look at it like this. If you talk with someone and find that together you discover that they should have healthy eating as part of their life, then you could internally have lots of different ways they support that decision. For some, it may be guilt, others greed, others vanity, others a search for balance. Some want to be stronger, some want to be free, better. Offer them paths that meet their needs, and you will feel awesome. You don't have to have the same reason why you think it's awesome. It only matters that they do the thing. They don't have to have the same ends, only the same means. You should choose your own name, and you should have your own logo, and you should have your own slogan, and you should have your own unique benefit statement, if not multiple statements that are relevant to the multiple parties to which your value is differently measured. It's very like the things your lovers care about are quite different from the things that your employers or employees or customers will care about, unless perhaps you're quite promiscuous and in the sex hire business. Perhaps then a more common statement would fit in all those places. For the non-sex workers among us, we're very likely to need a few varying great qualities to do the job optimally. Why would I suggest that you do these rare and rather crazy things? Well, for the same reason that one might suggest to any business that they do the same. In a world of limited resources, even the consideration and respect of others is a scarce resource. And if you leave the least to chance and ensure your success in the time you have here, you might as well do all the things that work. Led Zeppelin and Prince had logos that represented them. Businesses will spend millions upon millions of dollars changing a well-known name they've had for years in the very often belief that a more unique name will get them higher in the consciousness of their customers and users, and therefore is worth the short-term cost of changing to use a different and better name. Musicians and actors also often take advantage of the ability to choose not only one's clothing, but name to be more exotic and unique. And whereas you have probably not heard of Thomas Mapother, but you have heard of Tom Cruise, they're the same person. Ringo Starr, Cher, Prince, Jamie Foxx, and so on. Many people have taken advantage of choosing what their own name should be to meet their own desires in life, instead of using the rather optimized for someone else's goals name that you were assigned before you were old enough to have any say in it. I would say that last names are even worse because it's more common to have a good and common first name and a foreign-sounding, unpronounceable, or crappy last name. It's hard for someone to ruin a first name for you, and pretty easy to ruin a last name. You won't find many Hitlers, but you can still find quite many Adolfs. So if you have the courage to optimize your first name, do find the courage to optimize your last as well. You may have come into the good fortune that your last name is associated with greatness. Perhaps you are a Von something or another, or you are a Kennedy or a Bush, etc. If so, lucky you. Most of us are not. You have to know when some friends are telling you they think you have some kind of mental problem, particularly the same mental problem they have tried to convince themselves that they have. They might not be trying to harm you. They might only be trying to get you the same profit that they found in the belief of the strange mental trait. For instance, some people want to think they are psychos, but they actually aren't. They like the idea. And they want you to be as they are and profit in the screwed up belief as they think they do. So sometimes hurtful words in their mind are supposed to be helpful. Don't believe your own bullshit. Spirit. Don't believe your own bullshit. Perhaps you once did something great and you hope to do something great again. But this time, you're not going to do the thing the same way. This time, you believe your own hype and don't use the same tools and reference to excellence that you hit the first time. This time around, you may have more of you in the project, and yet you are likely to make a shit thing because what makes something great is rarely the product of a single person's new ideas, and commonly the product of a single person's mixing and melding and building on the greatest ideas they know, and by definition, those greatest ideas are not their own. If everything you are doing is new, it is probably bad. Or maybe you don't know that it's actually been done before, and you wrongly believe yourself to be the source. You must have objective reasons why something is measurably good or better outside your own opinion. Your own opinion rarely discovers anything new and often makes only judgments upon others' creation. Creation is harder than absorbing and rating. It's much easier to watch a film than to create a film. If people call you arrogant and they only ever hear the good things you say about yourself, how could they feel any different? If they weren't there when you were overhyping yourself, they have a poor sample size to estimate whether you have a healthy opinion of yourself that mirrors reality. If you are good at something and don't reward yourself by being accurate regarding your greatness at the thing, you aren't really helping yourself. You're just helping the shit talkers of the world that wish you harm and wish they were better than you. Now, that is to say, you need to be accurate and hopefully are referencing objecting measurement that is non-biased to qualify yourself for bragging or pride. Many fools claim greatness with only their own super-biased opinion for evidence. Be prideful where it is deserved, and be humble where it is appropriate. Don't mistake the pain losers feel when you remind them through your very existence that they're not achieving what they could in their lives, and they choose to tear you down instead of building it up themselves. If you were born into this world lucky enough to be male and strong and able to protect those around you, and instead you identify others' weaknesses, such as the weakness of women, children, or animals, as something to be punished instead of something to be protected, an opportunity to fulfill your birthright as a strong person, a powerful person, you are probably a piece of shit. Screw you. Don't become significant by trying to create or have identity with problems you don't actually need to have. Find a better way. Vicarious living through getting your friends laid, and girls that are in a relationship will try to hook you up with other girls because it makes them feel like they had sex with you, even though they couldn't. Know the difference between when someone wants to take a photo of you and don't want to actually get to know you. They just want the photo. This is like the Ferrari or Lambo. There is a difference between interest in you and interest in the car. If you took their advice and liked yourself less, what benefit would it do for the world? You'd produce less, you'd take less risk, and you might only hurt them less by reminding them how they suck during the few moments you are with those who are hateful. You should optimize for the environment you are more commonly in because it pays better dividends. Haters are always going to hate. Don't mistake novelty or interest in what is on you for interest in what is you or inside you. People rarely change for the better and seem to easily change for the worst. Purpose. You get what you do. When more people farmed for food, they would say you reap what you sow, which means that the seeds you plant grow into the plants they're supposed to.